Hi, folks. Before we continue our City Garden series, we wanted to share something with you. Since you enjoy stories from San Francisco, you might also like a podcast called Civic. It's produced by a local newsroom, the San Francisco Public Press. Civic is a go-to show for understanding how things work in San Francisco, or why sometimes they don't. They talk about what's going on in the city and the Bay Area with all kinds of people who have smart stuff to say. Activists, officials, researchers, and your neighbors. They ask questions about housing, public transportation, climate, the pandemic, or homelessness that you've been wondering about but might be too afraid to ask at this point. New episodes of Civic come out every Thursday. And for those of you not already aware, we recently added another new way to hear Storied San Francisco. Tune into KSFP Radio at 102.5 on the FM dial every Monday and Wednesday at 9 a.m. and again at 7 p.m. Okay, on with the show.
So my philosophy was always like, if I want to live here as a fourth generation San Franciscan, I'd have to hustle. Right. And I've hustled my whole life. I've had multiple jobs my whole life outside of my 9-to-5 profession. And part of it is like this gardening stuff for sure.
That was SF born and raised Jamie Chan. I'm Jeff, and this is Storied San Francisco. In this podcast, we get to know Jamie. Today, she's an educator, doctoral student, master gardener, and volunteer since 2016 at Sisterhood Gardens. Jamie will share her life story, which goes back 4 generations here in the city. She'll also introduce us to Sisterhood Gardens, a community garden located in the Ocean View, Merced Heights, Ingleside neighborhood. Here's Jamie.
My name is Jamie Chan, and I am an educator at the local university here at San Francisco State, but I'm also a master gardener, and that just means that I'm trained through the UC, the University of California Agricultural Extension, to be a garden educator. And so I got really interested in teaching people about gardening on the side, really interested in growing my own food after I had my own children here in San Francisco. And I grew up in San Francisco. I'm a 4th generation San Franciscan, so I grew up in a sandlot. You know, I didn't have gardening. My parents didn't come from a history of gardening, so I was very interested in learning about these processes. Even though I'm a biologist by training, I understand how plants grow, but I didn't know how to grow plants. And so you had to learn that. And then I got introduced, my husband and I bought a house here in this neighborhood, the Ocean View, Merced Heights, Ingleside neighborhood, OMI. And we were told by a friend of the district supervisor, his assistant, that, they're starting a community garden. Jamie and Bloss, you should really get in on this, because we were already doing garden education at that point. And
at different gardens?
Yeah, different gardens at the libraries, all informal environments outside of the classroom. And so we came and we were part of the founding of Sisterhood Gardens, which is right here. In 2016, apparently we broke ground,
Okay. Yeah. So you mentioned that you're 4th generation.
Yes.
San Franciscan.
Yes.
I would love to know more about your family, if whatever family histories that you know. I think those are really compelling stories.
Yeah, well, I mean, we were immigrants. Most of us are, from China, mainland China and Hong Kong. My family has a history of being teachers and educators,
here,
I believe.
And China? Okay.
And then we immigrated here. My parents, my great-great-grandfather immigrated here. I think that was during the gold rush era, if my timing is right. That's how far back my great-great-grandfather was. Wow. And of course we are, my mom's side, that was my mother's side, and we are paper sons and daughters, right? Yeah. And so when you come across, they gave you a different name, or you took a different name in order to gain access to America at the time. Of course, we're all citizens, but so that's the history of my mother's side, and that's how long we've been here.
Did your great-grandfather come over here voluntarily?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
Okay, so not necessarily
to
to work on like railroad crap and stuff like that.
I think that they were I think they were chefs at the time. They worked in somehow food service.
Yeah, all those prospectors had to eat.
Yes, and I guess we cooked for them.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's been a while since I did my 5th grade family history lesson.
Oh,
that's hopefully
okay.
that helps it a little bit.
Stuff that you don't know is fine.
Yeah.
But let's hear about what you do know. And it doesn't have to be only your great-grandfather, but like any of his
I mean, we've just been here a long time. My family all lived, both sides of my family, of course, were forced to or preferred to live in Chinatown, right, to be with their other Chinese community. And of course, redlining and segregation at the time required that most Asians live in certain neighborhoods at that far back, especially. Right. And so we were there, but then everybody's moved out to the Sunset, right? Okay. And the Richmond. So that's largely where my family is now.
Is that where you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up in the Sunset, Parkside by Stern Grove, if anybody's familiar where that park is.
Yeah.
So I grew up right there. I went to the San Francisco Unified Public Schools, so did my partner. We grew up here in San Francisco, so we're both natives. Yeah.
Do you know the story of how your parents met? Sorry, just...
Oh my goodness.
I want to still stick with the past.
You're hilarious. No, I didn't think I'd be asked that.
I love stories.
My
like
parents both grew up here. They both grew up in Chinatown. They went to Francisco Middle School in Galileo. Oh, yeah. My mother sat behind O.J. Simpson. You and I are old enough to know who he is, right? I don't think the young kids might know.
Yeah, that was before he was OJ.
Before the glove or whatever, the Bronco and the car chase. Right?
Jeez.
But yeah, I mean, that's her generation, if that gives you some context. Yeah. And so she grew up with him.
And Francisco Middle School, if I may, real quickly, I don't know if Freddys Sandwiches was around yet.
Oh my goodness, that's so great that you... Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if you mentioned Freddys. I taught there for a year when I was in my grad school years. I taught science to school kids.
So you know those sandwiches.
And Freddys is still the legacy. It still stands.
When people ask me my favorite sandwich, that's always at least
hilarious.
in the top 2.
I'm so glad you mentioned it.
Anyway, and I used to work over there. I don't live anywhere near it. So getting a sandwich with my wife now, it's like a date, almost like a journey.
It's a journey.
Yeah. So okay, so your mom went there.
They grew up and they knew each other, I think, growing up, but they met in college. They went away to Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, if you're familiar with that.
I am. Mm-hmm. Well, and I can't guess what they were doing there, but also Cal Poly is like a big...
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it makes sense that we're here.
They went to school. She was a dietitian, and my dad's an engineer. So, he's a computer engineer. Yeah.
And then they, graduated and came back.
Yeah, and they've lived here ever since. They bought their house in the 70s when at the time those prices... Yes, exactly. I'm trying to make a comment along those lines.
I'll editorialize for you, Jamie. Don't worry. So you grew up... do you want to, what was your childhood like? What was the city like? What was the neighborhood like?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, we grew up in the 80s, I suppose.
Yeah.
Then you can figure out my birth date.
Same. I'll just say same.
Yeah. And, I think it was a great childhood, but, honestly, largely still very segregated in a lot of ways. Like when you grew up in San Francisco, you kind of went to schools where there were largely Asian groups or Black and Latinx groups. And so definitely I feel like our schools are a little bit segregated back then and less diverse, and now they are more diverse, but we'll see. The politics of the school system and how our children are dispersed among them is a little bit wonky sometimes, in my opinion.
Button issue
I work
right
in the
now.
school. I work with training teachers right now at the university, so I'm very much, and my partner is a teacher in the local school district, so we have context to it.
What kind of things, maybe like as a teenager, were you getting out and doing things in the city?
Jeez, Jeff, I don't know. It's been ages. If you're the same age as me, we can't remember anything. Can you remember your teenage years?
I'm 48. I can't. Some of it.
Man, I don't know. I went to School of the Arts High School. It was a public magnet school, and so I was very interested in telling the stories of other people.
Right.
So I studied documentary film. So you would find me basically in a dark room trying to process poorly made black and white pictures that make us look dramatic as 15-year-olds, and then and then
black and white always does
film. I was using a lot of 16 millimeter, 8 millimeter. Remember those formats?
Yeah.
Experimental film. I was really into that. But more importantly, I was known for at least making documentary about identity, Asian American identity.
Awesome.
Growing up, ABC is what we called it, American-born Chinese. What is it to be, an American-born Chinese person, and the kind of cultural differences and stereotypes that you had to grow up with. These things have not changed because I'm a doctoral student now, and I study race in America in particular and teaching, and so a lot of stuff hasn't changed much, but how we
The work goes
understand it
on.
and how we talk about it and things like what you're doing, telling stories of other people who live it, is probably how we change those things, you know?
Yeah, and I think enough of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if there's an end to it, but the stories, that's why I'm drawn to this work.
And, you know,
is the
we are
stories
proud of
important.
our heritage, and we're
Right.
proud of our identity. I tend to, unfortunately, forefront the negative things, the deficit things, but just celebrating, like, who I was. And it's very hard when you grow up in America to figure out your identity ethnically when you're trying very much and Asian families in particular are always pushing their children to be more Americanized and more Westernized.
Assimilation,
But, like,
yeah.
we are Asian, and what does that mean, right? And so a lot of that was things I cared about as a teenager. What was I doing for fun? That was what I was doing. Film,
Okay,
photography.
darkroom.
I don't know. Wearing a lot of black. I was
So-
goth. I don't even know what that was
awesome.
about.
90s goth.
You remember, right?
Oh, totally. I was a skater, and like that's who I hung out
Back
with. Was
when
the
Vans
goth
were used for
kids.
skating.
Totally.
I don't know.
Totally.
You know, our young people today are adopting a lot of our fashion.
Birkenstocks
Have you
too.
noticed?
I'm like, what the heck?
Are you
that was
okay
the
with that?
90s.
Yeah.
I learned to stop caring.
Yeah.
Let go, Jeff.
Yeah. To give less of those Fs.
I am very curious about, so teenager, you were into film and photography, but then how did you become like a biology student?
So I went to
how did
art
that all
school
come
in
up?
Southern California, and I was amongst very privileged art students, and I didn't like the vibe. I was
Which
like, what am I
school?
doing here?
Can we name the school?
Oh, I think it was called Cal Arts. It's in
Yeah.
Valencia. It's
Yeah,
right
yeah.
outside of LA.
The only
And-
good thing about that is that Six Flags Magic
That's
Mountain is right
it's
there.
the only thing. Wow,
Love that
were you
place.
just there with me the whole time, Jeff? Were you just in my life?
Yeah, and just hanging out. I was filming you, filming people. No,
Me and my goth friends hanging on the lawn, looking depressed and forlorn. So
it's a weird
yeah.
part of California, right?
It
It's just very
is, it
suburban,
totally is,
and
yeah,
but,
it was
but
not
then the
fun.
best roller coasters in the entire. Anyway,
When you were just all in black and trying to not get tanned, you don't
it's
go out.
hot.
but-
There's so much
It was so
sun
freaking
down
hot there.
Yeah.
Anyways, I transferred back here, and at San Francisco State, where I ended up getting my degree, I just thought, what's the thing people should go into, especially, if you're somewhat close to your immigrant heritage, like, be successful. So I went into science. I wasn't actually very good at it, almost failed the first semester, but I became a biologist. I worked at the California Academy of Sciences, so I studied evolutionary biology of marine creatures, and actually,
Awesome.
and so that's what I did for a few years. And then I
Yeah.
became really interested in education and how we educate people, and so that's what I've been doing since then. Yeah.
Okay. When were you at State, may I ask?
I am still at State. I am employed there. I have never left.
Did you get an undergraduate degree there?
Yeah,
or
yeah. Now
when
I'm getting
was
my
that?
doctorate degree through them. Yeah.
When did you get your
Oh my
undergraduate?
goodness, I don't remember.
I just want to figure out because I think we might have
90
been there. Oh, you were there before me. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
98, 99, maybe 2000, 99, 2000.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how intertwined our lives are. I was there a
Yeah.
little bit later.
Yeah,
but-
I did take a couple film classes or in the arts that first semester, but I don't think you were in the class probably.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got that first degree, and then did you? Was it ever a question of whether you were going to stay in San Francisco?
That's a really good question. I think that's really one of the driving forces of my life story, because as a young person here, I clearly understood that people couldn't stay here. Housing rates were high, cost of living was high. 2008, there was a crash when I was in college. You and I were both in college probably around that time, or just getting out of college or something, right? Like grad school for me. And the world just looked like it was a very challenging place to be economically.
Yeah.
And so my philosophy was always like, if I want to live here as a fourth generation San Franciscan, I'd have to hustle.
Right.
And I've hustled my whole life. I've had multiple jobs my whole life outside of my 9-to-5 profession. And part of it is like this gardening stuff for sure. But I turn my jobs into my passion, right? And so we don't make a ton of money doing all the things we do, but we are very much part of the community as a result. So
Right.
I don't know if that answered it, but
It
but I've always
does.
wanted to live here. Of course, my parents and my grandparents and their parents lived here. But the idea of owning property, having a family, having some financial stability was always like a very challenging thing to think about.
Totally.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say, because you just said money wasn't the motivation, but anyone who has moved here in the last, I don't know, I'm going to say 20, 30 years, it's like, but it's something you have to handle it somehow.
Oh yeah,
You might
for
not
sure.
aspire to be wealthy, but it's like, but you have to make a decent amount of money.
This is not even wealth. It's wealth in the Midwest. What do we make, right? But it is not wealth here.
Right.
And it's that reality of the return on your work and time. It's a very tough thing for us San Franciscans to balance. Bay Area in general, of course. And I think, unfortunately, those who don't work in tech so much, I know that depends on what industry you work in, obviously.
Right.
And then so, we're educators, artists, like you name it. That's what me and my partner have been for ages. So it's about like finding the way to make it work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when in your biology schooling, when did you sort of, I guess, zero in or focus on like gardens and
so that was definitely after school. So I became, like I said, interested in like figuring out how to grow my own food, and I had a child, and we were really lucky. We worked through the mayor's office of housing to get a secondary loan for a down payment, and so we are homeowners. But it was a very major miracle that happened about 10 years ago. I would not say it was common, and the seller was so compassionate and wanted to sell to another San Franciscan.
Awesome.
And that is. We are literally just lucky. Like, I have no explanation for it.
Yeah.
And so...
Did it come with a yard?
Yes, exactly.
Awesome.
So the story is, we looked at many houses and many things that looked like they were going to fall apart. But we bought a house that had a bigger yard than a bigger indoor space. So so our yard is more square footage than our house. Our house is like 890 square feet. It's
I'll take it.
It's interesting to live in. Some days with 4 people, but there's 2 kids and 2 adults. But but it's worthwhile because we have chickens, we have honeybees, we have a mini orchard, and we use our outside more than our inside right now.
And then when did you discover about yourself that you wanted to be an educator and then marry those two
I mean, I have always
interests?
been interested in plants, but I never had anyone in my family. We're so divorced from any agricultural roots we may have had. All of our ancestors were probably farming at some point, right? Especially in the rural parts of China where my family comes from. But no one talks of it. No one talks and visibilizes it or even valued it, right? Like, they're like, that is our past, right? And so I really wanted to get connected with food and food systems, clearly as a scientist and as a mom and as someone who just lives in an urban area. Like, we need to do better, right? And so I became trained through the Master Gardeners program, and so it's like you pay a very nominal fee, and they train you for about a year, and then you become certified to be an educator yourself. You learn about gardening.
Was that at SF State?
No, it's a UC program. So University of California offers it. And every county has one, and we have one here. The San Francisco San Mateo County is combined, and then they do trainings every year. So you can sign up to be an educator.
Yeah.
You get this name tag thing.
Oh, cool. So did that program precede your work here?
Yes, it did. It certainly did. I did that, and then I would educate people at the local libraries, communities, rec centers, after-school programs. We did a lot of that kind of thing.
All over the city?
Yeah, all over the city, for sure. We're booked all over the city. And then consultation, we did some landscaping. My sister is a landscape architect, so she works for a firm. She does a lot of public parks and spaces, but she helps us do designs. We did some design installation. We would do, private yards and homes. We no longer do it. We're a little overbooked right now, so people do email us asking. We love doing it, but we're focusing more on the public work right now. Yeah.
And so you've been involved with Sisterhood Gardens, so coming up on 6 years, is that correct?
Yeah, I guess so. 2016 till now.
Do you want to talk about this place? I mean, on a personal level, what does it mean to you?
For sure. I mean, I had no idea what this would be. We were just told that, like, there's this group getting together. This property is owned by the Department of Public Works, and so the city owns it, a city division owns it, but they give permission to people to build on spaces, right?
Okay.
And so they put in money to landscape the space, all those stairs you were walking up. Some of these beds were built, and the concrete was poured, and then we assured we had water running, and that was it. They left us alone, and then we did everything else. And so all of this was really just a lot of volunteer work. Most of these raised beds are built by by just us,
Right.
just citizens coming together to do it.
Did DPW have a stipulation that it had to be a community garden or anything like that?
Yeah, so they don't allow commercial growing. I'm very heavily invested in the urban agricultural movement here in the area, and the work we're doing in the Portola in particular. There's something called the Greenhouse Project, if you're familiar with that.
I am after yesterday after talking with Isaiah and Danielle.
Good.
Yes.
Caitlin Galloway ran the first, one of the only commercial farms in San Francisco called Little City Gardens. It was here several years ago, and it's closed, right? And so I met her and got very networked with those groups. And then there's the San Francisco SFUAA, I think it's the Urban Agricultural Alliance. And so if you're part of those networks, you generally just learn about all these programs.
Right.
And so that's where we got kind of hooked in, and someone suggested because we live here in this neighborhood, that we be invested in this site. And so we got here and just helped out.
Were these trees, and I'm pointing to two very large and mature trees.
Yeah,
they must have been
trees.
Here, right?
Yeah,
Those are oaks? Okay.
They're oak trees. Oak trees live for, over 100+ years. Tim could tell you more about them.
Okay.
He's kind of our local native expert. I'm an edibles person, and I do a lot of the children and family education. But yeah, they're part of the permanent landscape. We are not allowed to move them, nor would we want to.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm one of those people there's a park near my house where they did some renovations on they have a community pool, but they have like a sports field. They have tennis courts and some baseball fields. But in all that renovation work, they cut down a really old, beautiful big tree, and I was like, it hurts me. It hurts my heart a little bit.
And more importantly, they're just so important for that, even this nano climate we talk about, this little ecosystem here, right? By creating shade.
The shade is amazing.
And also, certain plants can't actually grow with oak trees. They have a very healthy root system that kind of keeps other things out. And so that's why you'll notice this really clear mulched
under it
circumference around that root zone.
I do notice that.
But then things grow naturally underneath them, so those are planted strategically to be there. Yeah, we love our oak tree.
Okay, I don't think I have any more questions per se about the place or about your story. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, no problem.
But before I wrap with you, our theme this season on the podcast is We're Still Here. Speaking to a lot of things. What does that mean to you? You're a fourth generation San Franciscan.
Oh, the theme is We're Still Here?
We're still here. What does that mean to you?
I see. Oh,
the garden, your family, the life.
For sure. We are still here. And I think, there's just so much conversation about gentrification and the changing demographics of San Francisco and black flight in general too. Like when we think about how our wonderful black community has been either pushed out or overpriced. And this is a fact. If you look statistically about the diversity of our city, it's decreasing. And perhaps maybe Asian Americans don't help that, but I think that what it means by being here, being multi-generational Asian American here, is that, we have a long memory of what San Francisco was. My parents remember the civil rights movement, the I Hotel and the protests to save the Asian Americans that were living in Chinatown. They were part of all
SF
that.
State.
Yeah, and SF State and the protests during the 60s and 70s. My family and my history and the students I teach and the work I do at State is steeped in all of that.
Yeah.
And we are so proud of that. And I get to teach a whole new generation of kids, adults and college-age kids in various parts of my profession, that you live in the most diverse and one of the most liberal parts of the world because we fought for it and because we are so different and diverse, and that is something to be so proud of and celebrate. And also we need people to continue to fight for it, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think by being here, hopefully we serve as a little model, but we're just one of many. That's what's so great about Sisterhood. Sisterhood was named to kind of a play off of this road, which is Brotherhood Way, right?
Right.
And truthfully, we are a sisterhood and brotherhood of many people. The committee is made up of all races that I think of right now, many intersectional identities, and more importantly, each of us has a special role here. I'm the education expert. Tim does a lot of the native work and the plantings. Everyone works together, and not every garden is successful at always leveraging everyone's expertise and respect each other's space, but we do that really well. So I'm very proud, and we're here because because we are making each other, sustainable to stay here. So that's what sisterhood does for me.
That was Jamie Chan. On the next episode of Storied San Francisco, we'll meet Tim Wong, another volunteer at Sisterhood. Part 2 with Tim drops this Thursday, wherever you listen to podcasts. Music for the podcast was produced, performed, and curated by Otis McDonald. Original photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. Aaron Lim of Bitch Talk Podcast is our contributing producer. And the show is produced and hosted by me, Jeff Hunt. Now in our 4th season, we have more than 180 episodes available on our website, storiedsf.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you can, please rate and review the show so we can reach even more folks. We love email, and we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line at storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay strong, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time on Storied San Francisco.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.FM podcast network. Learn more at podcasts.bff.fm.
BFF.FM, best frequencies forever.